Della Marsh had sold her wedding ring, her mother's sewing machine, and the last good winter coat she owned, and she still had only $1,114 to her name. And then the lawyer's letter came, and it told her to be gone from the apartment by the 1st of the month. The kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and packing tape. Outside, in the gravel lot, a truck that was no longer hers idled in a stranger's hands. Cole had left her one thing in his name: a warden's cabin at the top of a forest road nobody had driven in years, a place the county valued at $1. When she finally pried up the loose plank by the woodstove, she found something her father had spent 38 years quietly building. She had been a bookkeeper once, before the marriage, before the children, before the years she gave away one at a time. She could still read a ledger in the dark. For a long moment she just stood there in the empty apartment and breathed. The last box was taped and stacked by the door. Everything she still owned fit in the bed of a borrowed pickup and a canvas satchel she wore across her body, like a soldier who had lost the war but kept the coat. She was 41 years old. She had not cried when the judge signed the papers, and she did not cry now. She looked once at the ring of clean linoleum where the refrigerator used to stand, the one square the years had not yellowed. And she thought that a marriage was a lot like that, a bright clean rectangle of nothing, marking the shape of a thing that used to be there. The deed was folded in the satchel. She had read it twice. Warden's Cabin, Parcel 4, Hollow Road, Pocahontas County, West Virginia. Assessed value, for tax purposes, $1. Cole had slid it across the diner table between them the week the divorce closed, and he had smiled the way he smiled at closings, the way a man smiles when he has already won and wants you to sign anyway. "It's yours, Dell," he'd said. "Your dad's old place. I don't want it. Nobody wants it." He had taken the house on Sycamore. He had taken the savings, the good truck, the retirement account she had fed for 19 years. And he had handed her a $1 cabin the way you hand a dog the bone with no meat, so it will feel it got something. She drove the 5 hours north into the mountains with the radio off. She had meant to keep it on, but the announcer's voice had felt like a hand on her shoulder from someone who did not know her, and she could not bear it, so she turned the knob until the hum died, and there was only the road and the ridgelines rising out of the haze like the backs of animals asleep. Autumn had already come to the high country. The maples had gone to rust and the hemlocks stood black-green against them, and the road went from asphalt to gravel to something that was not paved so much as remembered. Her father had driven this road 4,000 times. She had driven it as a girl in the passenger seat with her window down. She had been a bookkeeper before any of it. That was the thing she kept coming back to, mile after mile, the way your tongue keeps finding a broken tooth. She had a 2-year accounting certificate from the community college in Beckley, and 6 good years reconciling the books for a construction outfit, closing months clean to the penny, catching the small thefts nobody else could see. Then she had married Cole, and the first baby had come, and then the second, and Cole had said it made no sense for her to work when he could earn, and she had believed him, because he said it warmly, and because that was the arithmetic of a marriage in those years, and she had folded the ledgers of her own life shut, and set them on a high shelf, and let the dust take them. 19 years. She could still balance a column in her head faster than a machine. She had simply not been asked to in a very long time. The road climbed. She passed the turnoff to the old schoolhouse where she had learned her letters, gone to moss now, the roof half in. She passed the Methodist church with its one bell and its gravel lot, and the low place where the creek came close to the road and ran clear and cold over flat stones. Every mile of it was a mile she had thought she'd left behind on purpose. She had wanted the town on Sycamore and the 2-car garage and the life where nobody knew that her people had been mountain people who watched for fire. Cole had wanted it too, or she had thought he did. And now the town on Sycamore was his, and the mountain was the thing he'd thrown away, and she was driving back up into the one life she had spent 19 years trying to outrun. because it was the only roof left with her name anywhere near it. The plan was simple, and she said it out loud to the windshield so it would feel like a decision instead of a defeat. She would clean the cabin. She would find a buyer, or a scrapper, or a man from a hunting club who wanted the timber. She would take whatever dollars the worthless thing could be turned into, and she would be gone by morning. She was good at leaving now. She had gotten a great deal of practice at it lately, and the trick she had learned was to not look at the walls. The cabin came up on her the way it always had, all at once after the last switchback. Dark-stained logs, a tin roof gone the color of an old nickel, a stone chimney leaning a few degrees off true, the way an old man leans when he has stood in one spot too long. A porch with one rotted post and a swept plank floor, because her father had swept that porch every evening of his life, and the habit had outlived him for 2 full winters, and the boards still remembered the broom. She parked the borrowed truck on the gravel apron and sat with her hands on the wheel and did not get out. The engine ticked as it cooled. Somewhere on the ridge a wind moved through the spruce, and the whole mountain seemed to breathe out. And in the front window, on the sill, there was a lamp. A plain kerosene lamp, brass base gone soft with tarnish, glass chimney clouded with 2 years of dust. It was not lit. Of course it was not lit. No one had lived here in 2 years, but it sat exactly where it had always sat, dead center of the window that faced the road, angled a quarter turn so its light, when it had a light, would fall down the hollow toward anyone coming up. She remembered it lit. She remembered coming up this road as a child in the dark, carsick and tired, and seeing that one warm point of yellow floating in the black face of the mountain, and knowing she was almost home. Her father had never let it go out. Not in blizzards. Not the winter her mother was dying in the back room. You don't light it for the night somebody comes, Dell, he used to say. You light it for all the nights they don't. So it'll already be lit on the one night they do. She got out of the truck. The cold came down off the ridge and found the gaps in her coat. She stood in the gravel her father had raked, and she looked at the dead lamp in the window, and, against every plan she had made, something in her chest pulled tight and would not let go. The key was under the 3rd porch stone, where it had always been, and where a thief with any sense would have looked first, and where no thief had ever bothered to look because there was nothing in a fire warden's cabin worth the drive. The lock turned hard and then gave. The door swung in on the smell of cold ash and cedar and old wool, and she stood on the threshold of the one room that had held her whole childhood, and she made herself walk in. It was one room and a lean-to kitchen, and the little back room where her mother had died. A woodstove squatted black and cold in the center of it. A plank table. 2 chairs. A wall of shelves her father had built, sagging now, filled with cloth-bound books she had always assumed were his logbooks, weather, fire watch, the daily flat business of a man paid by the county to sit on a mountain and watch for smoke. A canvas warden's coat still hung on its peg by the door, shaped to the ghost of his shoulders. An enamel thermos on the shelf. A Folgers coffee can on the mantel, red gone to rust brown, heavy-looking, its plastic lid cracked. She walked the one room slowly, touching things, because you cannot help it. In a dead parent's house, your hands go out ahead of your grief. The thermos still smelled faintly of the coffee he drank black and scalding. The warden's coat on the peg held the shape of him so exactly that, for a moment, in the low light, she thought a man was standing in the corner, and her heart went sideways in her chest. On the shelf, propped, there was a photograph she had forgotten. Her mother young and laughing on this same porch. Her father beside her, not laughing, but looking at her mother the way he looked at things he intended to keep. And a second photograph, smaller. Herself at 7, gap-toothed, holding the kerosene lamp up to the camera with both hands like an offering. And on the back in his square hand, Dell keeps the light. She stood a long while with that one. The little back room she did not go into. The door was shut. Her mother had died in there when Della was 16, slowly through a whole winter, and her father had kept the lamp lit in the front window every single night of that winter, and Della had asked him once, angry the way grief makes you angry, who exactly he thought was coming, with Mama dying and the road snowed shut and nobody able to get up the mountain anyway. And he had said, without turning from the window, the same thing he always said, and she had hated him for it a little. And she understood now, 25 years too late, that he had not been lighting it for anyone on the road. He had been lighting it for her mother, so that on the nights she surfaced from the pain she would see it, and know she was not in the dark alone. Della had not understood that at 16. She understood it now, and the understanding put her on her knees. She would deal with all of it in the morning. Tonight, she only wanted to be warm, and to sleep, and to not think. She built a fire in the woodstove with kindling from the box her father had filled 2 years ago and never emptied, and she sat in his chair with her coat still on and watched the flames take, and for the first time in a long time the shaking in her hands began to settle. That was when she noticed the plank. The floor was wide pine board, hand-planed, dark with a century of boots. And in front of the woodstove, in the spot where a man would stand 1,000 evenings to feed the fire, one board sat a half-inch proud of the others. She had knelt to sweep an ash from the hearth, and her knee had rocked on it, that small betraying give of a thing not nailed down. She looked at it for a while. She told herself it was nothing. A warped board, a swollen nail. But her father had built this floor, and her father did not leave a board loose. He was a man who nailed the world down. She found the flat pry bar in the kitchen drawer where it had lived her whole life. She fit it into the seam. She breathed once, the way you do before you lift a thing you are afraid of, and she pried the plank up. Under it, in the dry dark between the joists, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with string, there were more of the cloth-bound books, not weather logs. She could see that at once from the first one she lifted out and untied and opened by the firelight, because the pages were not columns of temperature and wind. They were names. Names, and dates, and dollar amounts, and beside each one a single line in her father's square, careful hand. Gus Renner. March, choked on a bone alone in the hardware store, no one there. Drove him down. $0. He'll keep the pilot lit now. Pearl Dunmore. 2 winters. Wood delivered Tuesdays. Don't let her thank me. A boy, no last name, left on the county road in the rain, fed him, never once made him say thank you. She turned the pages, and her hands began to shake again, but for a different reason now. There were dozens of names. Hundreds, 38 years of them, one hollow's worth of quiet disasters and the one man who had driven down the mountain into every one of them. A woman whose husband had put her out. A family whose barn had burned. A boy who had aged out of the county's care with a garbage bag of clothes and nowhere on earth to go. Beside each name a dollar figure, and most of the figures were zeros, and the zeros were the ones that undid her. Because a zero meant he had given it, and written down that he had given it, and written down that no one was to know. If you've made it this far into Della's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. She read until the fire burned low and she had to feed it again. She kept a hand pressed flat to the pages as she read, the way you hold a hand over a wound, and the names went by her one at a time. Each one a night her father had put on his coat and gone down the mountain into somebody's worst hour. A March entry, barn fire at the Coyle place. Got the 2 horses out. Lost the 3rd. Sat with the boy till dawn. There was a whole page for the winter of the flu, a column of the sick, and beside them what he had carried up their roads, soup, wood, a doctor he had driven 3 hours to fetch, and 3 hours to return. There were entries that were only a date and a name and the word stayed, and she came to understand that stayed meant her father had sat all night in a stranger's kitchen so that a person would not be alone with something, and had written down only that he stayed, and nothing of what it cost him. He had never told her any of it. 19 years of Sunday phone calls, weather and the truck and was she eating enough, and not one word about the county he was quietly holding up with his own 2 hands. She had thought he was a lonely old man on a mountain. She had pitied him, a little, in the private way you pity a parent whose life looks small from inside your own. And he had let her. He had let her think it, rather than say a single thing that might have sounded like a man collecting credit for his kindness. "Don't let her thank me," he had written beside Pearl's name. It was the whole of him in 4 words. She read the whole first ledger and half the second, and somewhere in the second one the names began to include people she knew. The deputy, Hollis, who was slow in his speech and slower on his feet, and whom the whole county was gentle with, and whom her father had pulled out of the river the spring the ice broke early, she had never known that. Pruitt, who ran the feed store, and beside his name the line, paid his seed note in '99. He's paid it forward 11 times since. He keeps count. She had grown up in this county. She had thought it was just a poor cold place people left. She had not known she had grown up inside a quiet economy of debts that no one ever collected, and that her father had been the bank. At the bottom of the cavity, under the last of the ledgers, there was a coffee can. Not the one on the mantel, a second one, older, the paper label worn to nothing. She lifted it out, and it was heavy in a way that a can of coffee is not heavy. She pried the lid. It was full of money. Folded bills, banded in 10s and 20s, soft with handling, and tucked down the side a blue passbook from the Pocahontas County Farmers Bank, and when she opened it, the last stamped line read, "Balance, $38,406. $38,406. A man who had died with a truck worth nothing and a coat on a peg. A man the county assessed at $1 had put away, a little at a time, across a working life, $38,406. And he had not spent it on himself. It was still here. It was waiting. She did the arithmetic without meaning to, because that was how her mind had always worked. The cabin the county called $1. The account beneath it, 38,000 and change, more than 38,000 times what the deed said the place was worth. And that was before the ridge, the 81 acres of old growth that a lodge developer would price in the hundreds of thousands and never be allowed to buy. The math of it was staggering, but the math was not the point, and she knew that even as the numbers stacked themselves up neat in her head. The point was the last stamped line and the soft folded bills, and the fact that a man had gone without, quietly, for decades, so that the going without would be there in a coffee can for whoever came up the mountain next with nothing. He had not been saving money. He had been saving a door open. And folded inside the passbook, in an envelope gone soft as cloth, with her name on the front in his square hand, Della, there was a letter. She could not open it. Not yet. She held it in both hands, and she sat back on her heels on the cold floor by the open grave in the boards, and she looked up at the dead lamp in the window, and she understood, all at once and far too late, that she had spent 19 years married to a man who counted everything, and had grown-up daughter to a man who gave everything away, and that she had somehow ended up believing the first one and forgetting the second, and that the second one had been up here on this mountain the whole time, keeping a light lit for a night she finally came. She slept that night in her father's chair with the letter unopened in her lap and the ledgers stacked around her like a wall. In the morning the mountain was white with the first hard frost, and there was a truck on the gravel apron that was not hers. It was a big new half-ton dealer plate still in the back window, mud-free tires, and leaning against it with his phone in his hand was her ex-husband. Cole Marsh. 46 years old, good haircut, a soft gray blazer over a pressed shirt, boots that had never seen a working morning in their life. He had driven 5 hours. Cole did not drive 5 hours for a $1 cabin. He looked up from his phone as she came out onto the porch, and he smiled the closing smile. "Morning, Dell," he said. "You're a hard woman to find." "You gave me this place," she said. You knew exactly where I was." He laughed, easy, the way he laughed at men across a table before he took something from them. "I did," he said. "I did give it to you. And I want to talk to you about that, because it turns out I might have been a little hasty." There was a second person in the truck. Renee, she did not know the word anymore, and did not want it. Renee got out and stood by the door with her arms crossed against the cold, taking in the cabin, the porch, the ridge, the way a woman takes in a room she is about to measure for furniture that is not hers yet. Cole told it to her plainly, because Cole always told you the price plainly once he was sure he held the cards. A development company had come to his office in the city. Highland Reserve. They were assembling parcels along this ridge for a private hunting and lodge community, and this cabin, worthless as a building, sat on 81 acres of old-growth ridgeline right in the middle of the assembly. And they needed it. And they had money, and Cole had realized, a little late, that he had given away the one thing in the divorce that turned out to be worth something after all. "I'm not here to fight you," he said and spread his hands, reasonable, warm. "I'm here to help you. You can't do anything with this. You've got no money, no way to hold the taxes, no reason to freeze up here all winter. Sign it back to me, I'll handle Highland Reserve, and I'll give you a fair cut. $10,000, Dell, for a place worth $1. That's a good day. That's the best day you've had in a year, and we both know it." She stood on her father's swept porch, and behind her in the cabin were the ledgers, and the coffee can, and a passbook, and the letter she had not yet opened. And she looked at the man she had given 19 years to, and she was surprised to find that she was not afraid of him, and that the not being afraid felt like the first warm thing in a long, cold season. "I'll think about it," she said. That was not what Cole expected. He had expected relief. He had expected gratitude even. His smile stayed, but something behind it recalculated. "Don't think too long," he said. "These people don't wait. And a woman alone up here, that's a lot of things to go wrong." He left her his card on the porch rail with a pen laid across it, as if she might sign it there in the frost. He backed the big truck down the gravel road and was gone, and Renee's face in the window was the last thing to disappear around the bend. Della stood on the porch after the sound of the engine had faded down the hollow, and she thought about the 19 years. She thought about how the man who had just threatened her, gently, with a smile, in her dead father's yard, was the same man she had once believed would keep her safe from exactly the kind of cold she was now standing in. She thought about how easily she had handed him the ledgers of her own life, the certificate, the 6 good years, the whole capable self she had been before him, and how he had filed them somewhere and forgotten them, the way you forget an asset you have written down to nothing. And she thought that the cruelest thing Cole had ever done was not taking the house, or the truck, or the savings. It was teaching her, one small correction at a time, to see herself the way he saw her, as a thing worth $1. Her father had spent a whole life proving that the county's dollar assessments were lies. She had simply forgotten she was on the ledger, too. Della went back inside, and she opened the letter. She read it standing by the window with the gray morning coming up behind the glass. And she read it 3 times before the words stopped swimming, and then she sat down in her father's chair and pressed the soft envelope to her mouth, the way Bet would later press her glasses, and she stayed that way a long time while the fire settled and the mountain breathed outside. The letter had answered a question she had carried for so long she had stopped feeling its weight, whether the door being unlocked had ever included her. It had. It always had. She had spent 19 years believing herself locked out of a house that had never once had a lock, and the man who could have told her so had told her, in the only way he knew, by leaving the light where she would have to come up the mountain to find it. The Highland Reserve man came 2 days later. Bright quilted vest, boots with the price of them still shining, a smile like a screen door that would not quite latch. His name was Denton, and his handshake was a salesman's handshake, dry and quick and gone. He walked the property like he already owned it. He stood in the one room and looked at the sagging shelves and the dead lamp and the black wood stove, and he said, "Well, it's got character," in the voice of a man who meant it had nothing. He offered her $9,000. He said it the way you drop a coin in a cup, generous and a little bored. When she did not take it, he told her that of course she should think about her situation, a woman alone, no income, the taxes coming due, the road that the county might just decide it could no longer afford to maintain, the fire code that a structure like this surely did not meet. He smiled through all of it. He was, she understood, telling her exactly how it would go if she made him unhappy, and telling her with a smile so that afterward no one could say he had threatened her. "You seem like a sensible woman," Denton said, and it was the most menacing thing he had said yet, because in his mouth sensible meant biddable, meant a woman who would take a number and go, and she had spent 19 years being sensible in exactly that way, and it had cost her everything she owned. She stood on the porch and let him talk. She had learned, in the divorce, that a person will tell you the whole shape of their intention if you simply decline to fill the silence for them. Denton could not stand the silence. He kept adding to his offer without her having said a word, kept sweetening the terms, kept naming problems he could make disappear, and every problem he named was a problem he was promising to create if she refused. She watched him do it, and she thought, with a bookkeeper's cold clarity, that she was watching a man show her his whole ledger without knowing she could read. 40,000, he said finally, at the truck as though the number pained him. "That's my ceiling. That's more than your ex-husband told you it was worth, isn't it? He's not being straight with you, sweetheart. I am." He was not. But he had told her one true thing without meaning to. Cole had lied about the number. If Highland Reserve would pay 40,000 for this parcel through Cole, then this parcel was worth a great deal more than 40,000, because men like Denton did not lead with their ceiling, and men like Cole did not drive 5 hours to pocket a finder's fee on 10. She had done books for a construction firm for 6 years before the babies came. She knew what a land assembly was worth to the people assembling it, and she knew that the number a developer says out loud is the floor of a room whose ceiling he is standing on. She told Denton she would think about it. He left his card next to Cole's on the porch rail, and now there were two. That night, she did what she had not done in 19 years. She cleared the plank table, and she lit the kerosene lamp, cleaned the chimney with the hem of her shirt, trimmed the wick, touched a match to it, and set it back on the sill in the window that faced the road. And by its light and the firelight she opened the ledgers, and she went to work. It came back to her the way a language comes back, all at once, in the hands before the head. She squared the ledger's spines and set out the coffee can cash in banded stacks, and she began to reconcile. And the years of it, the folded-shut years on the high shelf, came down off that shelf and opened themselves. She was fast. She was faster than she had been at 25, because she had a patience now she had not owned then. The patience of a woman with nothing left to prove and nobody watching over her shoulder to tell her the work was small. She matched every deposit in the passbook to a line in the ledger. She traced the withdrawals, the small even ones that came each month, the larger ones that came whenever a name appeared with a real dollar figure beside it. She built, in a night, a complete accounting of her father's secret life, and when she was done, she sat back and looked at the columns she had made, and she understood that she had just done, for him, the one service no one else in the county could have done. She had proven, to the penny, that the poorest man on the mountain had spent 38 years quietly being its richest, and had balanced every account but his own. She was a bookkeeper. It was the one thing the marriage had not managed to take from her, because it had never thought it was worth taking. She reconciled her father's 38 years. She matched the coffee can cash to the passbook deposits. She followed the small even withdrawals that fed the county's disasters. And she found, tucked in the back of the last ledger, folded twice, a document with the county seal on it, and when she read it, her hands went still. It was a conservation easement. Recorded, field notarized 26 years ago at the Pocahontas County Courthouse. Her father had put the 81 acres, the old growth ridge, the whole worthless kingdom, into a permanent land trust that could never be logged, never be developed, never be assembled into a lodge community by anyone with a quilted vest and a dealer plate, for as long as the law of West Virginia stood. Highland Reserve could not buy it. Cole could not sell it. It had been protected in perpetuity before Della had even married the man who thought he had won it. She sat with that a long time, the lamp steady in the window, and then she laughed, a small, surprised sound in the empty room, because she understood at last that her father, who had never once in his life raised his voice, had reached forward 26 years through the dark and quietly, without a word to anyone, taken the whole thing off the table before the men who counted everything ever got to the table at all. But she did not know the law well enough to be sure, and she did not have $100 for a lawyer. So in the morning she drove down the mountain into town, to the one street with a hardware store and a feed store and a diner, and she asked the man behind the hardware counter, an old man, careful hands, a pilot light burning steady in the little space heater at his feet, whether there was anyone in the county who could read a legal paper for her. The old man looked at her a long moment. "You're Walt Halloran's girl," he said. It was not a question. You've got his eyes. He set down what he was holding. "I'm Gus Renner," he said. "Your daddy drove me down off this mountain the night I choked, 22 years back, in this very store, alone, and there wasn't a soul but him would have known to come. I've kept the light lit in that window down there every night since he passed, from clear down here just aimed up the hollow, so the mountain wouldn't go dark. You go see Bet Aldridge. Tell her Walt's girl needs her. She'll not charge you a dime, and don't you insult her by offering." Bet Aldridge was 71 years old, a retired county lawyer with reading glasses on a chain and a leather case worn soft at the corners, and she read the easement standing in her kitchen, and then she took her glasses off and pressed them to her lips for a moment before she spoke. "I filed this," she said. "I filed this for your father 26 years ago. He came in with cash in a coffee can, and he said, 'Bet, I want to fix it so nobody can ever undo it, not my kin, not the county, not some man in a truck.' And we fixed it." She looked at Della over the top of her glasses. "He didn't owe me the fee. I owed him. He got my boy into treatment in '91 and never sent a bill and never told a soul. So no. This land cannot be developed. Not by your ex-husband, not by Highland Reserve, not by anyone. It's done. It was done before they were ever born." Bet made coffee and sat her down at the kitchen table and walked her through it, line by line, in the plain, patient way of a woman who had spent 40 years turning the law into English for frightened people. "The easement ran with the land," she explained. "It did not belong to Della. It belonged to the ridge itself, in perpetuity, held by a small mountain land trust that still existed and still met twice a year in a church basement. No sale could break it. No heir could vote it away. A developer could buy the deed to the cabin 100 times over and own nothing but the right to sit in a one-room cabin and look at trees he could never touch." "Your daddy didn't just refuse to sell," Bet said, and there was something like awe in her voice, the professional admiring a clean piece of work. "He made it so that refusing was permanent. He took the temptation away from every Halloran who'd come after him, including you, honey, and including whatever man you might have married. He knew people are weak in a hard winter, so he made it so the land couldn't be sold even by somebody who was starving." She set down her cup. "I have practiced law in this county since 1979. That is the single most loving legal document I have ever read, and he wrote most of it himself, on a legal pad, in that square hand, and made me clean it up." Della drove back up the mountain, and the frost had burned off, and the ridge was gold and rust in the long afternoon light, and she found she was not thinking about the money. She was thinking about the lamp. There was a boy on the porch when she got back. He was 18, maybe 19. Lean, in a canvas coat, a size too big, and a knit cap. Wood dust on his boots, a battered pack at his feet. He watched the door of the truck open the way a person watches an exit they might need. He did not come toward her. He said, from the porch, in a voice that had practiced not asking for anything, "This is Walt's place." And then, quieter, he said if I ever had nowhere, I could come here. He said the door wasn't locked. He swallowed. I didn't know he'd passed. "I can go." "What's your name?" Della said. Theo. She knew the name. She had read it 2 nights ago by firelight, on a page near the end of the last ledger, in her father's square hand. Theo, aged out in the spring. Garbage bag of clothes. Won't take help if you offer it, so don't offer it, just leave the light on. She stood in the gravel her father had raked, and she looked at this boy who had walked up a mountain to a dead man's cabin, because a dead man had once told him the door wasn't locked, and she understood that she was standing exactly where her father had stood 100 times, and that there was only one thing to say, and that saying it was going to be the thing that saved her own life as much as his. "You're not going anywhere," she said. "There's stew on the stove, and it's too much for one. Bring your pack in out of the cold." He ate 3 bowls of stew, and tried not to let her see how hungry he was, and she pretended not to see, and that pretending was its own small mercy that she had learned the shape of from a dead man's ledger. He told her a little, in pieces, the way a boy tells you things when he has decided to trust you but has not decided to admit it. He had been in the county's care since he was small. He had aged out in the spring on his 18th birthday with a garbage bag and a bus token, the way they all did. He had met Walt 3 winters back, when Walt had found him sleeping in the church vestibule and had not called anyone, had only come back the next night with a sleeping bag and a thermos, and sat with him a while and told him about a cabin at the top of a road where the door was never locked. "He never made me say thank you," Theo said, and his voice did a thing then that he clearly hated. Everybody always makes you say thank you. He never did, not once. He looked at the fire. "I didn't come to take anything," he said. "I just didn't have anywhere the light was on." She gave him the little back room. She had not been able to go into it for herself, but she could open it for him, and there was a rightness in that she did not examine too closely, that the room where her mother had been kept alive by a lamp in a window would be the room where a lost boy finally slept through the night. She made the bed with wool blankets from the cedar chest, and she lit a candle against the cold, and she told him good night, and he said it back like a word in a language he was just learning. He slept through the night. In the morning she found him already up, splitting the woodpile down without being asked, his breath white in the frost, and he had swept the porch. He had swept the porch the way her father swept it, and she stood in the doorway and watched him, and had to hold the frame. The word went up the mountain the way word does in a county where everyone owes everyone something. Pearl Dunmore came first, 31 years a waitress at the diner, with a casserole and a question, "Have you eaten?" and did not wait for the answer before she was inside stacking wood by the stove. Pearl had a way of moving through a kitchen that asked no permission, and she talked the whole time, low and easy, about nothing. About the weather and the price of heating oil and whose grandbaby had been born, and Della understood that the talk was a kindness too, a way of filling a cold room with the ordinary sound of a life so that a grieving woman would not have to. "Your daddy left me a light in my worst winter," Pearl said, not looking up from the stove. "Leave the light, Pearl," he'd say when I tried to thank him. "Leave the light. So I'll say it to you. Leave the light on up here, honey. That's all the thanks anybody wants." Pruitt came from the feed store with a truck bed of split oak and would not take a cent. "Paid it forward 11 times, he said. I keep count. This is 12. He stacked the whole cord himself against the north wall while Theo worked beside him, the 2 of them not talking much. The older man showing the younger one how you cross the ends so a stack stands through a wind. Hollis, the slow deputy, came and stood in the yard and did not say much, and fixed the rotted porch post because it needed fixing, and he had brought the lumber. He measured twice and cut once and set the new post plumb, and when Della thanked him, he went red to the ears and said, "Your daddy pulled me out of the Greenbrier when the ice went. I was 9. I'd have gone under." He looked at the post. "It's a good post," he said, which was as close as Hollis came to saying anything about his own heart. Gus Renner drove up the hollow at dusk to see, with his own eyes, the lamp lit in the window again from up close. And when he saw it, he took off his cap and stood in the road a while, and then he got back in his truck and drove home without a word, and Della understood that some thank yous are too big for the mouth. They came the way the ledger said they had always come. And she began, without deciding to write them down. A new cloth-bound book, names and dates, and beside each one a single line in a hand that was learning to be square and careful. She was keeping the ledger. She had not planned to keep the ledger. It had simply been set down in front of her, the way the whole cabin had, and she had picked it up. Cole came back the second week, alone this time, without Renee, and she saw the change in him before he was out of the truck. He had made his calls. He had learned about the easement. He stood in the yard where his father-in-law had raked the gravel, and he had, for once, in the 19 years she had known him, nothing to sell. "You knew," he said, "when I offered you 10. You already knew it couldn't be touched. I found out after," she said. "But I'd have said no either way, Cole." He looked at the cabin, and the woodpile Theo had split, and the smoke going up straight in the still cold air, and the lamp burning yellow in the window in the middle of the afternoon because she had stopped putting it out. Something moved across his face that she had not seen there in a long time, something that might, in a better man, have grown into shame. He was displaced, not undone. He would drive back to the city and the house on Sycamore, and he would tell the story so that he came out of it fine. But for one moment, on the gravel, he was quiet. "He never liked me," Cole said finally. "Your dad. I never knew why. He liked everybody," Della said. "That's how you knew." Cole left. Before he pulled out, he set an envelope on the porch rail, unmarked, and did not explain it, and drove down the mountain and around the bend and was gone. Inside the envelope, later she found a check. It was not an apology, because Cole did not have the words for one and never would. It was just a number, written in his hand, and it was more than $10,000, and she understood it for what it was, the closest a man who counted everything could come to admitting he had once given away the only thing that mattered and called it worthless. She did not cash it for a long time. When she finally did, she put it in the coffee can. Denton from Highland Reserve made 2 more calls and then stopped calling. His truck backed down the gravel road one last gray morning and never came up it again. The ridge was safe. It had been safe for 26 years. It would be safe for as long as the law held, which her father had judged, correctly, to be longer than the patience of any man in a quilted vest. The letter, the one she had opened alone the first morning after Cole's first visit, she kept folded in the front of the new ledger, and she read it on the hard nights. It was not long. Her father was not a man of many words on paper any more than off it. "Dell," it said. "If you're reading this, you came up the mountain, and that means you needed to. And that means I was right to leave the light where you'd find it. Don't sell the ridge. It can't be sold anyway, I saw to that, but don't let anybody talk you into being sorry about it. The money in the can is for the next one who comes up with nothing. You'll know them. Feed them first, ask them nothing. The door's not locked, Dell. It never was. It was never locked to you either, all those years, and I'm sorry if you thought it was. Keep the light in the window. You don't light it for the night somebody comes. You light it for all the nights they don't. Your dad." There was a night in December that tested all of it. A storm came up the valley faster than the radio had promised, wet snow turning to ice. And near midnight there were headlights swinging wild at the bottom of the hollow, and then still, at an angle, in the ditch. Della was already pulling on her father's warden's coat before she had finished deciding to. Theo had the truck chains out of the lean-to. They went down the iced road together, slow, the lamp burning behind them in the window, and in the ditched car they found a young woman and a baby run off the mountain from a house she was leaving in the middle of the night with a black eye and $40, driving nowhere, driving away, the way Della herself had driven not so long ago. They brought her up to the cabin. Della fed her first and asked her nothing, exactly as the letter said. She put the baby to sleep in the warm by the stove, and she sat with the young woman until dawn while the ice ticked against the glass, and she did not leave her alone with it. In the morning, she wrote it in the ledger. A name, a date, and the single word her father had used, that she understood now from the inside, stayed. When the woman tried to thank her, Della heard her own mouth say the words before she had planned them. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just leave your light on, wherever you land. That's the whole of it." And she gave her $300 out of the coffee can, folded small, pressed into her hand at the truck, and would not hear a word about paying it back, because that was not how the account was kept. Winter came in hard over the Alleghenies after that, and the cabin held. Theo learned the woodstove and the water line and the way the road iced at the second switchback, and he stopped watching the door like an exit and started watching it like a thing that might bring someone he was glad to see. He asked her one evening, not looking up from the wood he was whittling, whether she thought Walt would have minded that Theo had come and stayed, and Della set down her pen and told him the truth, which was that her father had left the door unlocked for exactly one reason, and it was standing in front of her, holding a knife and a piece of cedar. And the boy had to leave the room for a minute after that, and neither of them ever spoke of it again, which was how it was done. Bet Aldridge drove up on Sundays with legal pads and taught Della how to set up the land trust so the ledger's work could go on being done after them both, a fund with a plain name, no plaque, so that the coffee can could keep feeding the next one up the mountain forever. Pearl and Pruitt and Gus and Hollis came and went, and the found family that her father had quietly built out of the counties broken and rescued closed around his daughter without anyone ever saying a word about it, because saying it was not how these things were done. She kept the books. She was, it turned out, very good at the one thing the marriage had thought too small to bother taking from her. She reconciled the past 38 years, and she opened the ledger on the next 38, and every evening, no matter the weather, no matter how tired, she cleaned the chimney and trimmed the wick and lit the kerosene lamp and set it in the window that faced the road. She thought sometimes about the woman she had been on the drive up, the one who had said out loud to the windshield that she would be gone by morning. That woman had been so tired of leaving. She had gotten so good at it, at not looking at the walls, at folding a life into a satchel and walking out clean. And the mountain had done to her the one thing the town on Sycamore never had. It had made her want to stay. Not out of duty. Not because there was nowhere else. She stayed because the light had to be kept, and it turned out that keeping a light for other people is the only thing she had ever found that also, quietly, keeps you. She wrote to her children that winter, both of them grown and gone into Cole's world, and told them there was a place in the mountains with their name on it, and the door was not locked, and she did not push, and she left the light on, and that was all a person could do. One of them wrote back by spring. It was a start. Her father, she thought, would have said a start was plenty. A start was a lamp. You did not need the whole sun. On the last evening of that first autumn, before the deep snows, Della Marsh stood on the swept porch at dusk, with the letter in her coat pocket and the ledger under her arm, and she watched the light go out of the sky over the ridge. She was 41 years old. Behind her the woodstove ticked, and Theo laid the table for 3, because Bet was staying to supper. Gus Renner's light burned steady down in the hollow, and up here her own light burned in the window to answer it. 2 small yellow points strung across the black face of the mountain, like a sentence that had finally found its period. She thought of Pearl's casserole, and Pruitt's oak, and Hollis's straight new porch post, and Bet's soft leather case, and Theo's swept boards. and she thought that a man could be assessed at $1 and be the richest man the county ever held, and no lawyer, no developer, no ex-husband with a good haircut had ever once been able to see it. She went in and blew across her cold hands and did not blow out the lamp. She never would again. A lamp isn't lit for the night someone comes. It's lit for all the nights they don't, so that it will already be burning on the one night they do.